All right, what's happening? It's your boy Blackbeard. We back in the Midnight Mirage and Masjid of Higher Learning. Just want to say what's up to the ladies and gentlemen. Major salute. We're about to go into some more history, of course. So in this evening's tape, what we're going to talk about is the two primary ancestral groups of modern day so-called black people or so-called African Americans in North America. These two primary groups are one, the indigenous civilized American groups that were here prior to the arrival of any European. Okay. Now, the reason why I say civilized is because maybe in future tapes, depending on how I feel, but there were two separate or two different groups that were here in the Americas when the European arrived. They found a civilized indigenous group that seemed to be travelers, that seemed to go across the Atlantic and the Pacific kind of regularly, and also shared a lot of cultures and shared similarities that they saw with some of the cultures that they were practicing and using in the Far East. So that means that when a lot of the people from Europe, etc., came to the Americas, they found people in the Americas that had monotheistic cultures just like they did, meaning that they were practicing ancient Hebraic cultures just like they did, in Europe and in the so-called Middle East. So they found people like that here, and they could relate to those people. And a lot of the business deals, a lot of the marriages, etc., that they got into, they did it with those American groups that they found here. But in addition to those American groups, you had also uncivilized people that were here, and they were living more of a, I'll just leave it at that, an uncivilized life. So they weren't necessarily living in the mound communities or the pyramid communities that the rest of the people were living in. Maybe they were in more remote areas in the woods, and they weren't even really aware of a lot of the modern stuff that was going on at the moment. They may not have been aware that people not doing polytheistic, pantheistic, idol worshiping and, blood sacrifices. They may have not even known people weren't doing that anymore because they were just lost in time, or weren't caught up with the time. Okay. So while the people at those times, let's say maybe in the, I'll just throw a year out there, 1298, they may have been practicing a certain, monotheistic culture. But those other tribes that were uncivilized, they could have been practicing cultures that were, for lack of a better word right now, outdated. So they may have been participating in certain things such as blood sacrifice, etc. So you have those two primary groups that were here in the Americas, and both of those groups were melanated or people of color. All right. And in addition to those groups, you also had the Mongoloid and the Siberian leftovers that were here, but none of us have their ancestry. We have the ancestry from these indigenous people of color that were here, the copper colored people, or the term I like to use, the Moorish peoples who were here in the Americas. So that's one primary ancestral group. And the other ancestral group that isn't talked about as much, and from my research, it said that we had about 30% of this group's DNA, but I think it's somewhere between 30 and 50%. So it's somewhere between 30 and 50% Moorish Europa. Okay. Now, when I say Moorish Europa, what I'm talking about is the indigenous people or the original people that were in what we call Europe. All right. And they were also a people of color, people of melanin of various shades. And they look like the people that you see in North America today that we call, quote unquote, black people. So I'm talking about the Moorish people of Europa, the Moorish Scottish, the Moorish Welsh, the Moorish Irish, and the Moorish British or Britain. All right. Britannica. And of course, you're looking at one of them on the screen, a Moorish Scottish king by the name of James Jacobus. All right. So these are the two primary groups we come from, the indigenous American tribes and the Moorish Europa groups that came to the Americas. Now, a lot of the Moorish Europa groups that came to the Americas, they came for various reasons. A lot of them were coming to spread the kingdom of the Most High, meaning that the Scottish crown under James, they were an Old Testament Israelite people. OK. And they also knew that the people in the Americas, some of them at least, practiced that same culture. So they came here to expand that. They also came from a lot of persecution that they were receiving from the barbaric Neanderthal troglodyte tribes that started to invade Europa around 449 AD. And they were being persecuted and being kicked out of Europa, believe it or not, by a lot of the quote unquote Caucasian groups that came in. And then they adopted the name, the British, the Anglo-Saxon, the French, etc. But they aren't the original groups that were there. So they came for those two reasons. And also a lot of them came, because they was explorers and they also wanted a new life, So what I'm saying is that even prior to the 1600s, but mainly in the early 1600s, because most of us know about, Virginia being the first colony of Europa. But you got to remember that Virginia was started by the Stewart line. All right. And these were, quote unquote, black people or Moorish peoples. So all the colonies of the 1600s to about the mid 1700s, all started by, quote unquote, black kings of Europa. And these groups are what we descend from in Europa. So the European last names that we have, they don't come from, quote unquote, slave masters. The truth is that the Caucasian wild Goyim, they had no last names, no names. They had no language, no culture, anything. So they just stole all our stuff. So they actually stole our last names. We don't have their last names. OK, so what I'm going to do in this book that I have is called The Negro Question Part 4, The Missing Link by Lee Cummings. And a lot of the pictures that you see is coming from this book. And that's also where my reading is coming from. And on the screen, you're looking at the King of the Scots, the British, the Irish, by the name of James. OK, so that's what you're looking at. King James, the man that's also responsible for the Bible. And I also want to dedicate this tape to King James, even though the brother is deceased. But it was I just through my research, a lot of people was hating on this man. But I see this man was a upright man and he tried to do the right thing, So salute to this man. But King James, let's read what it says right here. It says at the bottom, James, by the grace of God, King of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland. All right. So that's King James. And clearly you can see this is a so-called black man. OK. And also you can see he's holding the globe of world dominion. So then I say that when you're in your higher self, that you will become a king and an emperor and you will have world dominion. And you see he's holding that globe. Just keep that in mind. Just like how the Los Angeles Lakers just won the world championship, the globe, the ball, the world dominion. Keep that in mind. The so-called black man. You know what I'm saying? That's you, the king. All right. So let's go into some of this reading. So here is a quote that was written by Professor Boyd Dawkins. He was a professor of genealogy at Manchester University in London, and he wrote this in 1879. And on page 95 through 106, this is what he wrote in his book. The original people of Britain, France, Spain, and England were short black men of about 5'6". They were in England when our forefathers, the white or the wild English, invaded the land in 449 AD. Our fathers were a warlike people who by 607 AD had pushed the Basque west into Wales, Cumberland, Westmoreland, the Highlands of Scotland, and Devon. These people boasted that they were the citizens of the Roman Empire. The Welsh or ancient Britons were in possession before the Romans ever came. These black Briton and Basque have brought the knowledge of iron and bronze with them. The iron and bronze technology will be proven perfectly when I show you the German tapestry. So before I move forward, what I want to, get you to understand is how you see this man right here. He's of Iberian, or what you call Hebraic or Hebrew descent. OK, so this is a Moorish Hebrew that you see right here. And in future tapes, I'm going to show you why I'm saying a Moorish Hebrew, because some of the descendants of Judah, believe it or not, moved into the southern peninsula known as the Iberian Peninsula. In modern day, we call it Spain and Portugal. But basically, the original Spain and Portugal was inhabited by people that looked like King James, and they were the descendants of Judah. And through a marriage between the house of Judah and the house of Egypt, through the Pharaoh's daughter, Scotia, that's where you get Scottish from. OK, so just keep that in mind, that the people that are the original Iberians in southern Europe are also the same people of the original Northeast, where it's Germany and France, and the British Isles. So they're all the same so-called people, all so-called black people. All right. So it goes on to say that the English were the forefathers, meaning the Caucasian wild Neanderthals, when they invaded around 450 AD. So now if you want to know exactly when did the quote unquote white man or the wild man, when did he enter Europe? He entered Europe between 449 and 500 AD. Let me repeat. He entered Europe between 449 and 500 AD. And he was pushed into Europe because his original home was actually Asia Minor, or basically like that area around what we call quote unquote Turkey, a little further east in the Caucasus Mountains. So his original home is not the Caucasus Mountains. His original home is a little further east in what we call Asia. But the Moorish Empire of Tartaria and the brutality and the draconian mindset and warlike activity of Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun, they pushed a lot of those barbarian Caucasian tribes of Bactria, or the bacteria people. They pushed the bacteria people into Europa. And when they pushed the bacteria people into Europa, this is where you got the Black Plague from as well. So the Black Plague actually came from the Caucasian or the bacteria tribes of Asia, the pale flesh people, the Yaqub created people. The Black Plague came from them when they migrated into Europe around 450 to 500 AD. So it goes on to say that the Basque, or the ancient Britons, the Hebrews, were pushed into Wales, Cumberland, Westmoreland, and the Highland and Lowlands of Scotland and Devon. Okay. So most of our last names, believe it or not, they originate in some of these places. Let's move forward. So as you can see right here, this is an image of King James VI. OK, let's read real quick. So this is what you're looking at. King James came from a long line of Black or Moorish Scottish Stuart kings. Also, the word Stewart means that you are a servant of the Most High. OK, that's what that means. His last name was Jacobus, and Jacobus is Israel. So his real name was James Israel. All right. From the house of Stewart, or basically the house of people who work for the Most High. So let's keep going. It says King James came from a long line of Moorish Scottish Stuart kings, and they ruled for 343 years in Scotland. So the Stuart line of King James, or at least his line of where he came from, they ruled for 343 years. So that means that for 343 years, you all were ruling in so-called Europa. And believe it or not, four of the Scottish kings and one of the German kings by the name of King George started the 13 colonies. Let me repeat that one more time. The Stuart kings, meaning King James VI and his sons, King James, Charles I, Charles II, Charles I, Charles II. It was one of his descendants, and then King George, who started the colony of quote unquote Georgia in I think 1751. The 13 colonies were started by the Moorish kings of Europa, and King James was one of them. King James was the one who started Virginia, I want to say in 1607. So let's read, okay? So it says the Stuarts not only ruled in Scotland, they ruled France, Spain, Ireland, and Britain, England, Wales. King James was able to rule all of these lands because all of these people were of Iberian or quote unquote Black or Moorish descent. They were the same people. If you look at the ball in his hands, it represents world rulership. And there was only one other group of leaders who used this type of symbolism, and they were the Byzantine Roman emperors. So remember, I told you about the ball. So you saw the Moorish Empire of the East and the West holding the ball that represents world dominion. All right. So he goes on to write, this is one of the signs of, it says, in my research, I found out that the ancient Scottish was a tribe from Northeast Ireland, which means the Scots are really Irish. So the Scots, the Irish, they're the same people. Once again, they all ancient Iberians. So if I have seen an ancient Scot, I have seen an ancient Irishman. And if I have seen an ancient Irishman, then I have seen an ancient Briton. And once again, most of these people were moving further west into the British Isles because these barbarians were starting to invade in 450 AD. But even prior to that, they were always there. So let me see real quick. We'll come back to them pictures. So right here, as you can see from this Scottish kings list, King James I of England was a descendant of the Black or Moorish Scottish kings who claimed the thrones of France, Spain, Ireland, England, Britain, Wales, and Scotland. In order to reinforce the testimony of Professor Boyd Dawkins, I have provided you an image with other Stuart kings of Scotland. So as you can see right here, this is how long they were ruling. Remember, I said 343 years. All right. So this is the group that was before King James. So King James ruled from 1567 to 1625. But he had ancestors who was ruling before him since 1371. And even prior to that, Alexander II was even ruling. And he's one of the earlier ancestors. All right. Let's go to our next picture. So you're looking at King Charles of Scots and England. All right. So this is King Charles, one of the sons of King James. King Charles I had the unlucky distinction of having his head cut off by the wild English, or the quote unquote whites. All right. And remember also, too, that some of these whites, once they came into Western Europe, that through a lot of war and conquest, a lot of the Moors that were in Western Europe, they subdued them. And they made them, work on the plantations and farms, and they were the landlords. So if you hear that term, a landlord, like with the person you pay your rent to, that was what the original Moors were, of Europe. And the Caucasian people had to pay us rent by working on the land, and really they were sharecroppers. And if they didn't, produce or yield enough on our own property, then they would get kicked off. So they were, they were treated kind of harsh, but nevertheless, they were living in Western Europe, and after a while they got sick of it, and as you'll learn, in future tapes also, or if you just do your own research, that the German line through King George usurped the throne of the British Isles. Let me repeat that. The German line of King George, they usurped the throne of the British Isles. So remember now, the 13 colonies were started by two types of black men. They were started by the black men of the British Isles, the Scottish, the Welsh, the British, and they were started by the black men of Germany. And that's King George and them. Most of us descend from the people from the British Isles. So we were coming over here more under King James and King Charles and them. When they started creating those charters for all the colonies, that's when a lot of our ancestors started coming. And a lot of them, when they came here, they were intermixing with the indigenous tribes that were already here. This is just facts. So it says that King Charles I wasn't the only one to suffer this indignation, because King Charles actually was beheaded by Oliver Cromwell and a lot of the wild, savage, barbarian, Neanderthal sons of the Tamahu, who really, I think, were under the control of King George and the Germans, believe it or not, the black Germans, or the Moorish Germans, rather. And I think that's how he also usurped the throne through a lot of the civil wars of the English civil wars. But we'll go into that. But anyway, it says that when the white English overran the country, they hung and decapitated the men, raped the women, burned the citizens at the stake, and dashed the children against stones. So as you can see, this is King Charles. This is a so-called black man. And that's his natural hair. Also, too, the Moorish Europeans, or the Moorish Europans, the Hebrews of Europe, we didn't wear wigs. So these like their hair actually looked like this for real. This is their real natural long hair. So we weren't wearing wigs and all that. You know what I'm saying? This is our real hair, So let's see. Let me do a time check real quick. All right. Doing good. So once again, that's King Charles of Scots and England, one of the sons of King James. All right. Right here, you're looking at a Scottish coat of arms. And as you can see, this is a Moorish woman, or a so-called black woman. How many black women in America do you know that look like this? How many of you black women that may be listening to this tape may quote unquote look like this? I know plenty of black women who look like this. Now, this is a family crest of the family of Andrews, Colmore, Eddington, Gruntham, Mayer, Maynell, Moore, spelled Moore, and More, More, St. Lo, Weldon, Witterong, and Wooton. So if any of you all have those last names, this is your family crest or your family coat of arms. And you descend from the ancient Scottish or the Moorish Iberian Hebrews. All right. And you're going to see why I'm saying Hebrews in a minute. So let's see where we want to go next. All right, here we are. History records that after the execution of King Charles I, which is this man right here, after the execution of this man, it says, history records that after the execution of King Charles I of Scotland and England, that Oliver Cromwell, which was more than likely a Freemasonic agent of the Hanoverian German line of Moors, invaded Scotland, killed 4,000 men, and took 10,000 captive. For some inexplicable reason, it took Cromwell 1 year to end the war in Scotland. What I do know, and I am certain of, is that he deported the Scots to American colonies. These black Europeans were sent to Barbados, Boston, Charleston, Cambridge, Concord, Hingham, Ipswich, Charleston, Virginia, Newark, and the Southern Plantations. These are the facts, ladies and gentlemen. These black Scottish are among us in the Americas, and we are ignorant of their existence as well as they are. All right. So you're looking at an ancient Scottish person right here. All right. And of course, that's the Moorish coat of arms. So it says that Oliver Cromwell was Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, Ireland, and Scotland after the assassination of Scottish English King Charles I. Upon taking military command of the Commonwealth, he invaded Ireland, and history states that he committed genocide in Ireland against the black population. The black British that he didn't kill, he sold into the quote-unquote slave trade. Listen up, y'all. In 1641, Cromwell had 300,000 black British sold into the North Atlantic slave trade. And in 1650, he had 100,000 Irish/Scottish children sold into the Barbados. So this guy, Oliver Cromwell, who either was an amalgamated, meaning a mulatto, or he was a Caucasian who was raised up through the freed and accepted Masonic system of probably some of them German Moors, or he was a regular so-called black man who was just rebelling against the Stewart line, and he used the Caucasian wild people as his beast of burden to do the fighting. All right. But when you read about Oliver Cromwell, that's who that character is. Now let's read about some of the wars and some of the things that happened, because our people were actually destroyed in Europa. So when you hear about the people of Israel being destroyed in the Americas, it also happened in Europa. Remember, they came here in America and only did what they had just done in Europa. And what they did in Europa was the same thing they did in the Americas. So the same way that the Americans were being, brutalized, and they say they killed off the Native American and all that different stuff, gave them smallpox, gave them the Black Death and all that. That's what they did in Europa. And they did it to the Moorish peoples, the Moorish Irish, the Moorish British, the Moorish Scottish, our ancestors. That other 50% that I say that our ancestry holds. Remember, we 50% indigenous Moorish European, and we 50% indigenous American. All right. So let's read. Now let's look at this picture. It's talking about the 1641 rebellion. Remember, there was a civil war in the British Isles between the Moorish European, or the Moorish Euro. I don't want to even say European. I want to say the Moorish Hebrew. That's really how you have to refer to our people. So when I say the Scottish, the British, the Irish, the Welsh, these really are Moorish Hebrews. OK, that's really what they are. They were Moorish Hebrews who were practicing what we thought was Christianity, but really it was Old Testament Israelite culture. And they had just modernized it. Really. That's how Fadum folks was. You know what I'm saying? That's how clever and creative they were. Let's read. This is a scene from the destruction of Drogheda, Ireland, by the white English in 1641. They stripped the people naked and drove them into the mountains to freeze to death, but not before uttering a strange statement about the English being wild men. Remember, the Irish were black in the 1600s. So you're looking at a picture of over here on the left. This is the wild Caucasian Irish, who probably were being used by some dirty Moor. And now in this picture, they made the people quote unquote white. But in real life, these would have been the Moorish Irish. These would have been the Moorish Hebrews of the British Isles. And what they did is they would kill a lot of our people, and they would strip the people naked and then force them to live in the frozen tundras of the British Isles. And then a lot of our people would freeze to death, and die of starvation, etc. And as you can see right here, you can see the Caucasian people driving the Moorish Hebrews into basically, living in freezing in the woods and stuff like that, because they wanted us to feel how they felt when they were living in the caves of Asia Minor and living in the caves of the Caucasus. So, you see how they did us because of how we did them with the Yaqub thing. Here go them right here. This says the Irish History, Ireland Library, 1641 rebellion. This is when the Caucasian wild people that were the serfs rebelled against the Moorish Hebrews, who were the nobles of Scotland, like on that coat of arms. This when they rebelled in 1641. And you see how they did us? They pushed us into the damn cave, or pushed us into the cold naked, just like we did them. It's funny how shit be repeating itself. So let's read some of this other wild shit that they was doing. Now, this is a gruesome street picture right here. So as you can see, this is the same thing when the English were rebellion in 1641. When I say the English, I'm talking about the wild white barbarians who took on that title English. As you can see right here in the bottom left, you got a wild Caucasian trying to, rape one of the Moorish, Hebraic, Scottish, Irish women right here. As you can see, they killed the one and threw on the ground right here. And over here, they had a Moorish Hebraic woman that was pregnant. But what they did is they cut her open and they took the baby out and bashed the baby and threw it on the ground. And as you can see, here go one of the Caucasian white slaves, of George doing the dirty work, putting in the hit. Here go another one over here. And as you can see, they sliced the sister open. So our people went through some real shit, man. It says Irish Rebellion, 1641. It's what they did. This is a so-called black woman right here. And as you can see, they strung up the baby over here and cut the baby open. So this is the type of shit that they was doing. Let me read this shit. It says that the scribe says that this is great tyranny done to the SR, his wife and children. If you take a look at this scene, they have ripped the child out of the black Irish man's wife's stomach and tossed it on the ground. These are eyewitness accounts of the actions of the white English when they invaded Ireland. They invaded Ireland. They're not from there. They're not even from no fucking cave. They from the pipette of Yaqub, really. This the type of shit they was doing. This type of shit they was doing. Let's read another story. It says the scribe writes that at 1 a.m., 7 papists, when they say the papists, they talking about the Caucasian Catholic Ku Klux Klan. Because remember, the papists and the papacy, King James and the Stewart line, they weren't with the papacy. You see? It says that at 1 a.m., 7 papists broke into Mr. Atkins. Mr. Atkins more than likely was a Moorish Hebrew, and beat his brains out and then raped his wife, who was pregnant with child. It states that after they raped her, they took the unborn child and sacrificed it in the fire. In other scenes from this horrific event, you can see the English drowning the black Irish children in the rivers. So I just want to take some time to show you that, this shit happened also in Europa. Let me do a time check. All right. Let me see. Hopefully I can get it on. We doing good. Now, what you have right here in front of you is a picture of King James VI of Scotland, King Charles I of Scotland, and Black Boy King Charles II of Scotland. And this picture is found in Bucklebury Bank of London. And as you can see, they're all the Stuart line. All right. Descendants of King James, Scottish, Irish, British kings. And they're all holding the globe in their hand of world dominion. Once again, whenever you see the so-called black man holding the globe, holding any type of ball in his hand, he's showing that he has world dominion and he's in his higher self. He's ready to rule. All right, wait a minute. All right, let me see. Now, this picture right here is of King James VI, Stewart of Scotland and England, the Highlander. When they say the Highlander, they mean the British Isles living in the highlands of Scotland. And you also had the lowlands. So if you all want to know your last names Look up some of the highlands and lowlands of Scotland, the British Isles, and you'll see your last names come from them places. But as you can see, this is King James VI, King of the Hebrews, King of Hibernia, King of Iberia. Okay. Now, what is this on his head? As you can see, this is King James, the Hebrew, with a fez on. All right. King James with a fez on. All right. Once again, showing you that the fez is a Moorish cultural thing, that no matter if you were a Christian, a Hebrew, or a Muslim, if you all practice the same culture, you all practice the ancient Hebraic culture, monotheistic, you didn't eat pork, you didn't practice usury, etc. You kept the commandments, you kept the statutes, etc. Then they was all the same people. So they didn't look at it the way we look at it today. So the way that, a lot of people that are saying that the quote unquote Moors are not Hebrews and all that different stuff, that the Israelites are not Hebrews, that means that they really haven't done enough research. All right. So as you can see right here, that it has also King James. Once again, it says King of the Hebrews, Hibernia. But this is King James. So why would the King of the Hebrews be wearing a fez on his head? And as you can see, his fez got a different style because all the fezes had various styles. But clearly you can see that this is a fez. So why would they be saying King of the Hebrews, but he has a fez on? All right. So once again, they show you that a lot of these pictures are very, very hidden. And you got to do some digging around to get the truth. And once again, his last name was Jacobus. All right. Or Israel. So when he called the United Kingdom Zion or Israel, this is why. He didn't eat pork and he didn't fuck with the Catholic papacy and the church, the Catholic Church, because they were Babylonian. And he knew that. He knew that they weren't practicing real Old Testament. He knew they weren't really following the scriptures. So that's why he had to create a whole new Bible, and put the truth back together from the ancient Hebraic Paleo Hebrew. Because these dirty ass Romans, a lot of them bleached out Moors and a lot of them satanic Luciferian ones that I talked about in them other tapes, they started switching up a lot of the scriptures and creating what they wanted to be the code. And King James went to war with them niggas. So this is a very, very powerful picture right here that, is very, very rare. And, I found it in one of my books and I was shocked when I saw it because this just crushes all arguments that the Moors and the Hebrews are not the same people. It destroys all of those arguments because he's calling himself King of the Hebrews, yet he's King of Ireland, Britain, Scotland, and Welsh. You know what I'm saying? France. So he called himself King of the Hebrews because the people that lived in all these areas, if they were practicing that same culture, meaning that they kept the Sabbath on Saturday, they didn't eat pork, they weren't practicing usury, etc., then they were Hebrews. And they were melanated Moorish peoples. They were Hebrews. All right. So, that's a pretty good picture for y'all right there. We went through this line of Scottish kings list. You go back over there if you need to. This is a picture of King James VI, the Stewart of Scotland, and his wife, Anne of Denmark. All right. And as you can see, she's a so-called black woman. All right. So if y'all want to know how did some of the so-called black women look, this is how one of them looked. And this was his wife. So he didn't have a Caucasian pale wife. All right. So that's how you know that King Charles I, King Charles II, and all his other sons, they were so-called black because the mother was black and the father is black. So-called black, but really Moorish. So let me repeat that. The father is Moorish, melanated indigenous man. The mother is Moorish, melanated indigenous woman. So you know that their children are. And as you can see, it's also, the brother King James and the Holy Bible. All right. So this is very, very important right here now, because the Stewart line, the brothers who created the 13 colonies, they were also responsible for the Bible being put together. And we come from them same people. So you have to accept that you have an inheritance in the Americas and in Europa, the British Isles. Let me repeat. You have an inheritance in the Americas and the British Isles on both sides of the Atlantic, because another word for Hebrew is those who crossed over. So we always crossed over the Atlantic rivers. And then when they became the Atlantic Ocean, it didn't matter. We was always crossing over it since the ancient, super ancient world. All right. So the Bible is actually our inheritance. And this is why you hear me refer to it all the time, because this is our culture. So the Quran and the Old Testament, or the Bible, they really are saying the same thing. It's the same culture. You know, so this is actually our culture. This is why you'll see King James wearing this type of crown on his head. But yet he also will wear a fez. Because if you were a Muslim and you read the Quran and you kept up the same culture and commandments that he kept, then this man was identifying with you and you would identify with him. So they didn't look at it the way we look at it today. You see, they just didn't. So hopefully this was a good tape. Let me check the time. All right. Yeah, hopefully this was a good tape. You know, I had fun making it. Y'all, you know, hit me up in the comment section and let me know what y'all think. Especially let me know what you think about this picture of King James with the fez on, because I really think this is going to clear up a lot for you all. Remember now, this is a copper-colored man. This is a so-called black man. King James VI of Scotland and England, the Highlander. This is him. Here go another picture of him. Here go another picture of him right here. You know. And then here go another picture of him right here. Here go a picture of his son, Charles I. Charles I was a so-called black man. And then Charles II, they call him the black boy. So this man right here, King James VI, is the same man wearing this fez. All right. So y'all, you know, just look into some of this stuff. Stay tuned. I'm out.